Hello, and welcome to the May webinar hosted by Together Women Rise. I am Vidya Prakash. I serve on the Rise Board of Directors and chair our Grants and Partnerships Committee. I will be your moderator for tonight's conversation with Sacred Valley Health, our May featured grantee. Whether this is your first Rise event or you are a returning member, we are delighted to have you join us. Thank you. So, a little about Together Women Rise. We are a powerful community of women and allies dedicated to achieving global gender equality. We come together as a community to learn about the challenges and issues faced by women and girls in low-income communities in the global south. And we give grants to organizations that are working towards gender equality in these countries. How do we do this? Your gifts to Rise through collective giving have a powerful impact to transform the lives of women and girls everywhere. To support Rise or learn more, please visit our website at togetherwomenrise.org. And with that, a few housekeeping items before we get started. We are on Zoom, but please keep yourself on mute while our speakers are presenting. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. We encourage you to enter your questions in the chat function, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as we can. And to enable the closed captioning feature, just go to the Zoom toolbar and click on Show Captions in your language of choice. And last, we are trying something new and exciting tonight, a virtual chapter meeting after the webinar tonight. So please do remain on Zoom after the program has concluded. Vicky Bush-Joseph, the Vice Chair of Rise's Board of Directors, will be hosting that conversation right here. With that, it's time now to turn to our program for tonight. This month's spotlight is on Sacred Valley Health. They are also known as Ai Nivasi, the local Quechua name for Sacred Valley Health. They empower Indigenous girls in Peru through culturally sensitive reproductive health education and leadership training. First, a short video, and then we will jump right into the conversation with our guest speaker. Kia?
In the high altitudes of the southern Peruvian Andes, indigenous communities continue to survive despite their long histories of discrimination. These communities maintain their traditions of medicinal plant knowledge, sustainable farming, and wool processing and weaving. The language spoken in these communities is Quechua, an oral tradition that preserves ideas, knowledge, and culture from their pre-colonization ancestors. Unfortunately, their knowledge and culture is not valued in modern society. The long history of colonization normalizes practices of marginalization that lead to profound disparities in access to basic human needs, such as clean water, education, and healthcare, as well as representation in government. In Sacred Valley Health, we have partnered with these communities for the past 13 years to work to improve access to health resources. As we continue to grow, we acknowledge the need to work with younger populations. We are excited to use the funding from Together Women Rise to further develop our Adolescent Initiative. To create a culturally contextualized program that addresses the lack of educational resources these adolescents face.
No caso time ilda no kusus tradisione na programa de adolescente B no kamchana comunidad de paticante y ñaña chip kashala y no kusus tradisione.
Throughout the program, they will come together with a female mentor to create a safe space for learning and supporting one another. They will plan events in their communities to promote continued development and sharing of their knowledge.
Mi nombre es Mayumi, soy de la comunidad de Huillo. Estoy muy contenta de participar en este programa de adolescentes.
We hope to graduate capable, confident, interculturally fluent young female leaders who are able to defend their communities from the societal forces working against them while simultaneously maintaining their rich knowledge and culture.
Gracias to Women Woman Rise.
Thank you, Kia. That was lovely. Welcome, Kate. Kate Arnone is joining us today from Sacred Valley Health, or Ainivasi, where she is a curriculum development coordinator. She has spent the past 6 years living and working in high altitude communities in the Andes, specializing in intercultural teamwork and curriculum contextualization. Kate is committed to creating educational resources that are attuned with local cultures and needs. Her approach to work is rooted in a fundamental belief that every person deserves basic human rights. In addition to her role at Ainivasi, Kate is currently pursuing a master's in social work through Loyola University's bilingual program, where she's expanding her expertise in social justice. Kate, welcome to Rise, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Hello, good evening.
So, thank you for sharing that video. It's always lovely to see the women, the girls, the context in which they live. And I guess the first question we'd love to talk to you about is Sacred Valley Health has such a powerful focus on improving health access and empowering Indigenous women and girls. Could you share a little bit about what inspired the founding of the organization and how has its mission evolved over time to meet the needs of the community?
Yeah, so our organization was founded by Carrie, a woman from the United States, and she came down and first started working in these communities through another nonprofit that focuses on weaving. And as a nurse, she's a nurse, as a nurse, she kind of had an eye for the medical needs that she was seeing in these communities. And so she first started organizing clinics, like groups of doctors to come down from the States and do week-long clinics in the communities, which was important and kind of fulfilling a certain need. But as she spent more time doing that, she realized that there was also a huge gap of health knowledge, and that these clinics, although they were important, weren't really leaving sustainable change in the communities. And so when she started thinking about more, that's when she first had the idea for a community health worker program. And that's when Ainivasi Sacred Valley Health was started. We've grown and changed a lot over the past 13 years as an organization. And I would say that those changes haven't been as much due to changing needs in the population, but more Ainivasi as an organization aligning ourselves more with the local culture and making sure that we are understanding the work that we're doing all kind of from the same perspective.
Thank you. And that speaks, I guess, to the resilience of the organization because you are evolving to meet the needs of the community and meeting folks where they are at. Um,
Mhm.
what we loved when we learned more about Sacred Valley Health is that your programs place a really strong emphasis on cultural sensitivity, especially in delivering health education in Quechua and using storytelling, the power of the narrative. Uh, Share with us why this cultural grounding is so essential to the success of your work.
Yeah, and I think this particularly is a huge way that we've grown over these 13 years. When we first started, the curriculum, the trainings were planned by people like me, not from here, taught in Spanish and translated in the moment to Quechua. And I think that was a good first effort, but also didn't take a lot of things into consideration. Quechua and Spanish are very different languages. You know, how you express ideas is really different. So translating in the moment can be incredibly hard. But it also wasn't taking into account, I think, those of us like me, like many people on this call who grew up in the United States, people who grew up in Europe, a lot of this public health world or models that we are given about how work is done comes very much entrenched in that value system and the worldviews of people from these countries. And since we grow up in that, since I grew up in that, I think it can, and it's just the air that we breathe, it's kind of hard to realize how much of that we bring into the work that we do. And I think also that piece was really not taken into account in the beginning. You know, it's not just teaching about a health practice, but you're teaching it from your own worldview. And so if you're not aligning that with the people that you are teaching to, then so much can be lost in translation. So we've really worked hard to review the curriculums. Now the curriculum development team is majority local people, Quechua speakers, who are then the ones who do the training. We now have a train the trainer model. So a lot of our community health workers can then become trainers for certain programs. And so they're the ones doing the training to the community health workers. And throughout those different levels of teaching and just encouraging so much use of example, use of personal narrative, how they came to learn these things or why it's important in their own lives is a really important piece of that, and making sure that the communication is understood from the same worldview. You could also see a little bit in the video. Quechua isn't a written language, and so all of our resources are visually based. Now we get to work with a graphic designer in creating that, and I think that's a really key point to making our curriculum accessible and available for the community health workers to then bring that and continue teaching that while respecting their Quechua language.
That's fascinating. I would love to see the visual content
Yeah.
of the curriculum. I mean, that kind of local grounding, the lens that you bring into that is probably key to how you sustain the program and keep it relevant to the lives of women and girls in your community. Um, the RISE grant specifically supports the Adolescent Girls Empowerment Initiative. If you could walk us through what are the key goals of this initiative and help us understand a little more context. Why is sexual and reproductive health education so critical, so urgent for girls in the Sacred Valley today?
Yeah, so the empowerment curriculum has a lot of things underneath of it. And as I am working on reviewing and getting this curriculum up to date, I've done a lot of focus groups and interviews in the communities with girls to make sure that all of the things that we are including in it are relevant and are really being asked for from us. So we are going to talk about puberty. We are going to talk about sexual and reproductive health. But one of the things that was most asked of me from the adults that I interviewed was talking about self-esteem and identity. And so that's going to be included in the curriculum in a lot of different ways. And we can't really talk about those things, especially in these Indigenous communities, without contextualizing that within the societal, historical, political context that we're living in. I mean, these our girls. So we are located in Ollantaytambo, which is a couple thousand people, and the communities we work in are within our district. There's 38 Indigenous communities. And even when they come down to the town of Ollanta, they just receive discrimination here for being from the communities. And so we can't just talk about self-esteem and loving ourselves without acknowledging this reality that we're living. I really like to ground my curriculum development in critical pedagogy. And so thinking about how we're raising the conscious awareness of all these things around us and how it's affecting us. We're also going to talk about healthy relationships and how that connects to those other themes. We're going to talk about violence. We're going to talk about interpersonal violence that is faced in these communities, but also kind of like state-led violence that these communities have faced, and connected with violence rights. Like, what rights do we have as individuals that protect us? What are the institutions that enforce those rights? But also, what rights do we have as communities, and how to make sure that those are enforced as well. Which kind of will bring us into community development. So part of this program, the adolescents are going to do community projects. So really like bringing this critical eye back to their own communities, and how they, through the knowledge that they learn, can empower the communities that they live in. So yeah, it's a lot of different things, but I think they weave themselves together in a really beautiful way. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, as I am listening to you, it's a word picture of the community is kind of getting built in front of my eyes. And I am understanding how sensitive some of the topics that you deal with are. I mean, we talked about gender-based violence, you talked about domestic violence. So, how do you build self-esteem when these are communities that may be seen in a different light? And that's before we even talk about sexual reproductive health and other such topics. One way that you're doing this is your participatory training approach, which is what we loved about your application when we reviewed it in the grants committee. You are using a variety of tools. You talked about focus groups, workshops, young leader networks, culturally adapted materials. How did you develop this model? And what kind of lessons have you learned over time as you are piloting and refining these tools?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've really developed this model. I'm gonna kind of go back to the same thing by listening, and trying things and making mistakes and being committed to trying again and doing better the next time. As we grow and as we gain more community health workers in the communities and can get more people's perspectives in that, we can understand better and of what functions and what doesn't. We worked with some external consultants this year who were kind of supporting like multicultural organizational development. And they were Quechua speakers. So they were really able to have trainings and meet with different pieces of our organization. And we gained so much important information from that. So I think, yeah, just the commitment to keep learning and understanding what works and what is how work is done here, and not just adhering to what the United States or European values tell us that this work should be done. And not only us as the foreign staff needing to not think of that, but I think these kind of hierarchies are steeped into all of this and are definitely steeped into the local staff as well. So it's really a deconstruction of a lot, and that I think takes intentional work and continuing to come back to the big questions of what we're doing and how we can do it better, and the flexibility to actually listen and adapt with what comes from asking those questions.
Absolutely. I'm taking away three themes that you just touched upon. You talked about learning and unlearning, which is
Mhm.
hard for all of us to do. You talked about
Mhm.
listening with respect. And I think you
Mhm.
keep bringing us back to meeting the community where they are at instead of having
Mhm.
them meet you where you're at. And I think those are three golden rules for any program. Um,
Mhm.
could you talk to us a little bit about some of the biggest barriers girls face when it comes to accessing knowledge? about reproductive health practices and services in these communities. Maybe share an example that you have seen in your community. And how does Sacred Valley Health help these girls overcome these barriers?
Yeah, so I think in order to understand this, we really need to understand the context of these communities. So these are populations that have really just suffered a lot of violence and discrimination since colonization leading into a plantation system where the Indigenous were forced laborers. This plantation system only ended 50 years ago. And now even the current government does not really consider or prioritize their need for basic human rights. In the 90s, the government had a campaign of forced sterilizations for Indigenous women in these communities in the Andes. So even now that supposedly it's better and Quechua is considered an official language of Peru, there is no access to resources for health education in Quechua. When you go to the health centers, you're not necessarily going to meet someone that speaks Quechua. There's very limited access to bilingual education. And so these communities are continued to be marginalized and kept out of power and kept out of access to knowledge because of their language and because of the lack of the government in creating resources accessible to them. And so I think that's really important to kind of understand. And all of these different people that have been in power over these past 500 years have intentionally made sure that they don't continue practicing their own traditional health practices or passing them along. You know, now there is quite a high fine for giving birth outside of the healthcare system. And so that just from one generation to the next took away all of this knowledge in the midwifery practices of the communities. And now that is no longer being passed along. And I think different policy combined with the violence has created a lot of silence around a lot of these themes in the communities and a tabooness about talking with them. I think that then combines with the patriarchy, which everywhere doesn't want women to have this knowledge about our own bodies and about our own systems. So knowing this and knowing how it has been in the past teaching in the women's health program, I expected in these interviews that I did with adults in the communities to get a little more resistance to teaching sexual and reproductive health. But everyone was incredibly open to it. And I think it kind of points to this shift. A lot of young people from these communities are moving to the city, to Cusco, to Lima to pursue higher education. And so within the adults of the communities, it's kind of seen as something important for them to have as they move forward. So that was interesting. And in terms of how we're addressing it, so currently we have the community health workers, which are women that we've been working with the past 13 years. I also interviewed a couple of them for this program, and they said that in two cases that the youth of their communities know that they have this information and know that they're willing to have candid conversations with them, and that young people do come to their home to ask and have these conversations with them. So I really love that that is kind of already set up, and the adolescent program is definitely going to lean on the community health workers that we already have. And then through the adolescent program, the pilot that we did, we obviously taught about these themes. We encouraged the girls to bring their resources, to teach their friends, to talk with people. But in this new program that, or the second stage of this program, the adolescents are going to do these small community projects. And so I'm excited to see what they decide is the most important knowledge to transfer to their community and how they decide to do it.
And we are excited to learn about that as your program unfolds. So that's going to be good learning all around. So you talked about community health workers a short while ago, and that is one element of your work that really inspired me. That's the fact that past program participants have actually gone on to become staff or community leaders at Sacred Valley Health or in the community more broadly. That's a very powerful way for change to kind of come back around. And can you share a story of a girl or a woman who has come full circle in this way? from being a participant in the program, now evolving, growing to take on a position of leadership and influence in the community?
Yeah, so the woman that I want to talk about is Santusa. Santusa is from the community of Wiyok. She's an insanely talented weaver. And she mostly had been working within her community with her weaving, with her agricultural practices, tending to her crops, to her alpacas, to her sheep. And then she started in Ainiwasi in 2021. So I actually got to see her when she first began. And obviously different participants interact with programs in different way, but from the beginning, you could tell she was really excited about it. She was really into it. Since then, over these past 4 years, she has grown a lot. She became a facilitator for future programs. Right now, she's a facilitator for the women's health program. So she trains the new community health workers. And then she also goes and visits them individually in their home to reinforce that knowledge and make sure that they're getting it. Kind of separately, we receive visiting groups from the United States, high schools or colleges who want to come learn from us. And so she's also working and coordinating those community visits and teaching those individuals who come. And now we're very excited that she's going to be a coordinator for the adolescent program. So she's kind of moving up from the facilitator to the coordinator. She's going to have a lot more power and influence within the decisions that are made about it. And I was talking with her about the program a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about self-esteem, and I was like, how have you worked on your self-esteem in your life? Or like, how has you grown in that? And she was like, before working at Ainiwasi, I hadn't really thought about the importance of my voice. And she was like, oof, if I never started working at Ainiwasi, like, ¿qué sería de mí? Like what would my life be without this? And that was one of those like once a year moments you get of like, oh, okay, we are doing something. But I'm really excited to see how she grows in this program. And I think she will continue to do wonderful things here and also within her community.
Thank you. What a powerful role model she must make for the women and girls in the program. So that's exciting. So with that, Kate, because we'd love to know what the future now holds for Sacred Valley Health. You have piloted a new program. There are a lot of learnings that you're now feeding back in. Um, this might be impacting families more broadly, the schools, the community, local policy. Talk to us about how you see the next stage of this program playing out. And also, if there are any plans to maybe replicate this in other regions or take it to other parts of Peru. Yeah, so what does the future hold for you?
Yeah, so I mean, on one side, the adolescent program, I think, is really kind of shifting from this community health worker model that we've been most focused on, and working with younger populations, working with community projects with them. I think it's going to be so exciting to see what they do and how we have a lot of talk about how can we get more involved with the local government, how can we do more empowerment for these communities in that way. So I think there's going to be a lot of shift kind of on this local level of empowering the individuals from the communities in other spaces outside of Ainiwasi. Another really exciting thing is we've been working with the senior, I don't know exactly what all their acronyms are, but the government institution that accredits new educational trainings. And so together we're creating a new vocational degree within Peru for community health workers. It's been a long process. We're almost there, but once that happens, all of our community health workers will have certificates that'll be recognized on a national level for the training that they have, which hopefully will open doors to them to employment in other ways. And then Ainiwasi will also become an institution that can accredit other organizations that are doing community health worker work. So I kind of see Ainiwasi growing in that way, being a consultant for other organizations who are doing this work nationwide. I think in terms of scaling up what we do, I feel like there's a big power in being really local and being really specialized. There is author Adrienne Marie Brown, who has a great book called Emergent Strategy, kind of just thinking about change and how that happens in societies. And she talks about the difference of projects that are like 2 miles wide, so really, really broad, but 2 inches deep, that people aren't as involved. And then the opposite being 2 inches wide, but 2 miles deep. And I really see that as being the beauty of what Aniwasi does. Our curriculum, so much of our things are so specialized to this area. Obviously, in Ollantaytambo, there are 38 Indigenous communities. We only work with 16 of them, so we can definitely grow, but I see us still maintaining that work pretty local.
Okay, I love the power of being local. I mean, when I take your analogy and I think about all the seeds that you're planting in your community and you're digging to make sure they go deep, this kind of change will definitely take root in the community for future generations of women and girls. Kate, that was a lovely conversation. Thank you for your very thoughtful responses. And I'm now going to open up this conversation for our members to ask questions. I know people have been busy on the chat. Kia, can you help us just reading out the questions we have so far?
Yes, we're getting a lot of questions in, so I'm glad we have a bit of time for that. Your first question, Kate, is from Linda, who would love to hear a specific example of how you've adjusted the teachings to meet the different worldview that you mentioned the students have.
A specific example. So I can think about hand washing. Hand washing seems like such a simple thing to be teaching. And one time we were talking with a community health worker and she was like, yeah, I had a really interesting encounter with another woman in my community. And she was saying, she was out in the field and they were talking about the importance of washing her hands before she ate. And she was like, but compañera, like, I am from the earth and I have the earth on my hands and the potatoes that I'm picking are also from the earth. So why would I have to wash off the earth to eat the potatoes if me and the earth and the potatoes are all the same? And so that was just a good example for me of like, oh yeah, like my understanding of germs and all of these things are not at all connected with the earth or connected with these systems in that kind of way. So I can't just think about explaining hand washing to you like they were able to explain it to me in elementary school. You know, we really need to take that into account in the teaching of it. I mean, I think another thing with hand washing is you have to buy soap, which to us could not seem like a big deal. In these communities, they're very agriculturally based. They do a lot of trading with other communities between the resources that they have. And so there is abundance in food, there is not abundance in money. And so when thinking to ask someone to use some of the little money that they have for soap, for this practice that isn't normalized to them, that also really needs to be taken into account, the kind of sacrifice that has to be asked for. So those are kind of two different sides of it that I would say.
Yeah, that's a great example because it's something so basic that you wouldn't quite think about it. Thank you for that. Our next question is from Sheila. She asks about the girls. Do they attend school through high school and are the courses taught in Quechuan? And do most of the young women also read and write in Spanish, since you said Quechuan isn't a written language?
Yeah, so I would say this generation that's growing up now is the first generation from these communities that mostly is finishing high school. In a lot of the communities, there are small elementary schools. Yeah, I know in one of our communities, Chaihuacocha, there's 20 students between pre-K and 6th grade. And so after that and those educations in the elementary schools are considered bilingual. How much it ends up being really depends upon the staff of that specific school. After that, they can go to high school within the public system. There are boarding schools for them, a little bit closer down to Ollantaytambo. I would say a majority of the youth now are going through high school. And because these schools are bilingual, they are learning Spanish from a young age. Whereas the community health workers that we work with that are adults didn't have that opportunity, and many of them only speak Quechua. So there's a pretty big generational gap.
Interesting. Yeah, I noticed in the video as well, one of the students, one of the girls was speaking Spanish. I recognize the Spanish, but not the other language. Our next question's from Vicky. So it's kind of similar to the one we just talked about in terms of high school, but what is the expected level of formal education that these participants from our grant will achieve? And kind of like how different is it from mothers and grandmothers? You said it's a pretty big generational difference. And how does that impact their, I guess, kind of relationships and how they interact with their communities?
Yeah, I think about this a lot because I mean, I think everywhere in the world, parents and grandparents make sacrifices for their children to have futures that they perceive as better than the life that they were able to live. And a lot of girls are leaving their communities after 6th grade to be able to pursue higher education or high school. Some of them coming here to Ollantaytambo, some of them going to Cusco, working to be able to have a place to stay, to then also be in high school. And once they are living in these realities, it's very, very different than the communities they grew up in. And so many of them don't return. I would say part of our goal is to increase that cultural identity so that they do want to return. The youth that we do see that stay in the communities have a lot of energy and have a lot of excitement for how they can work to improve their communities. This area, so Ollantaytambo, if any of you have been to Machu Picchu, this is where you get on the train to go there. So tourism is really gone crazy in the past 20 years, and that's seen a lot of changes in positive and negative ways, but it brings a lot more money to this area. And so a lot of the youth from the communities are trying to see how they can also be involved in that and be sharing the practices and things that they have in their community that are beautifully rich and connect with tourism. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, and as a follow-up, the girls who do decide to stay in their communities, who don't, leave for school or jobs, how do they earn money in the communities that are agriculturally based?
Yeah, there aren't many opportunities to. Weaving is a big one. So they do produce weavings that usually organizations or people go up and buy that from them within their own community. They also sell their alpaca wool. But the main sources of income are mostly coming from men and men who come down and work as porters or as cooks in tourism. And so that's also a very new thing to these communities, and the men aren't present for maybe 2-3 weeks of the month. And so it leaves a lot of responsibilities on the women who are staying home, taking care of the children, taking care of the crops, taking care of the animals. And that's something that our community health workers really love our program, also to just have access to come into town more, have access to meeting women from other communities because they are really forced to be in their home because of this current setup of roles.
Great, thank you. And personally, do you speak Quechuan?
No, I don't. I can understand something. I have spent many hours being the only one in the room who doesn't. So I pick up a lot of things, but fluently, no. I wish.
Right, the last question that I see here, but we do have time for more questions. So if anyone wants to add their question to the chat, please do so. We do have a little bit more time. This has been a really fascinating discussion. But Marianne would love to know, does the global staff ever talk about serving a younger population of girls versus the age at which you begin the program now?
We haven't. We decided for this program to focus on 11 to 13-year-olds. That, in terms of looking at the research that has done about adolescent programs, seems like a good age, or an age that good practices can really be encouraged at. So we haven't thought about working with younger populations. I think we'll do this for a bit and see how it's working and see if we then expand from there. But for now, this is what seems good for us.
How, this is a question from Joan, how do the men in these communities feel about women and girls getting this education and being a bigger voice in their community?
Yeah, that there is some tough conversations that we have had there. Because we have been doing it longer and teaching these things longer in the community health worker program, I have more examples from that, but there has been times when our staff has gone to the community meetings and men have been like, why are you teaching this to our women so that they can be with other people? And a lot of anger that we have had to dealt with. I think, as I kind of said with these interviews, I feel like there is a bit of a shift. I talked to some men and they were still open to it. But I mean, machismo, the patriarchy is very seeped into these communities. So there definitely is more resistance from the men.
Yeah, for a lot of the programs that we fund, our members are really interested to see how the rest of the community responds to these programs. So thank you for sharing that. Can you talk a little bit more, a question from Linda, about child marriage and early childbearing? And is that an issue in these communities? Are you allowed to teach about birth control? What are some of those culturally sensitive issues around child rearing?
Yeah, so there are the rates for like adolescent pregnancies aren't very high in these communities. They are definitely present. That is something that some of the people talked about in the interviews that I had. We are going to talk about birth control. I think that was a touchy topic, especially here within the staff. Are we going to teach it? How are we going to teach it? These girls are so young. How are people going to react? And so I have been trying to be as upfront with everyone I've talked to about this program that will be a part of it. And so far I haven't received a ton of negative feedback. As I was saying before, I think that these younger generations are really living different realities than their parents were. And so it's kind of seen as this like, this is like some city knowledge that my kid will have to be able to go and live in that city environment. Yeah, well, we will see how it goes. It'll be interesting.
Yes, please let us know how it goes in one of the reports. Another question from Vidya, who we spoke with earlier, wants to learn a little bit more about the concept of respectful listening while also bringing in these new ideas. How do you balance those two?
I think time. You gotta go really, really, really slow. And I would say, so when we first started reviewing all of the curriculums and making sure that they're really based in the context of where we are, I was kind of facilitating that process. And I would spend probably 30% of the time thinking about the content of a meeting that I was preparing for, and 70% of the time thinking about how I was going to present the ideas, how we were going to do them visually, or giving time to tell stories for us, or just thinking so much more about that piece of it, how we are having the conversation, to really ensure that we were all understanding the same thing. I mean, as I said, these hierarchies are really inside all of us, and the local staff that I was working with were very used to different young people coming from the United States and running the curriculum development training and all of that process. And I very intentionally wanted to do something different. And so, yeah, being very intentional about the structure of those meetings, how we were bringing up ideas, what I was learning from them about what their ways of learning were, or how things really got seeped in or not, and adapting myself to all of those different things that I was seeing. It's a fascinating process, and I think we still have a lot more to do. But yeah, I've really enjoyed that piece of it.
Great. Can you also, since we do have some time, share a little bit more about how you came to this work? We talked a little bit about your professional background in the intro of our conversation, but kind of what brings you to this work and keeps you in it?
Yeah, I had never worked in public health before coming to Aniwasi 6 years ago. Actually, I studied psychology, sociology, have mostly been in educational settings of some kind. I had lived for a year in Guatemala working at like a school nonprofit there. Then I had kind of traveled for a year, got to the Andes, and knew I wanted to stay. So when I came into this role, I was like, what are my skills going to be? How am I going to do this? I don't know public health. But I think creating all of these soft skills, all of these things that I was talking about in the meetings, like knowing how to create relationships with people who have different understandings of the world than me, thinking about education in different settings and the experiences that I had had in those ways were really important for the work that I do here. And I have also grown and learned so much in this role from the different supervisors and directors that I have worked with, and working with the communities more and more time. I think just like, yeah, the dedication to really wanting to do something well, and to listen and do the work that is necessary in order for that to happen. I have worked so hard on my relationships with the local staff, and understanding that I am the outsider and I'm choosing to come here. And so how can I adapt to be understood and to create richer connections with them? So yeah, that's me a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story. We have time for one more question, and it's from Martina. And she asks if you could talk a little bit more about wilderness medicine and how Indigenous medicine and ancestral knowledge is incorporated into the programs of SVH. And kind of on top of that, does religion play a role, in all of this, and what's kind of the religion of these communities, the primary religion?
Yeah, so I would say that this knowledge definitely from the beginning was not as incorporated. Every time we're trying to incorporate it more and more. One way in which we really do show the value of their plant medicine, there is a ton of knowledge about it in the communities, is through our visiting program. So visiting groups can come and go to these communities and learn from them about the plant knowledge that they have. We really try to work away from volunteer tourism or having the visiting groups seem like we need something from them. They are coming to learn from our communities. And so that has been really lovely to work with the community health workers in creating kind of their presentations about their knowledge about the plants and putting value in that. In terms of in the curriculum, there's a lot of small ways that it's included, but that's definitely a goal for Iniwasi and for how we're going to grow into the future. In terms of religion, I would say the way of life here is more based kind of around a spirituality and a worldview and how that is understood in the rhythms of their work and in their lives. Evangelical churches are moving into these communities, which is causing a lot of change and causing a lot of kind of rift from their traditional practices and ways of being. We definitely had to deal with that a lot in the pandemic. Some of the churches were telling them that if they came to the evangelical church, then they wouldn't have to wear a mask, that their God would protect them. So that was definitely present in the conversation there. But I would say it mostly keeps women from being included in our program. So it hasn't been as much of a topic within the community health workers that we have had.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Kate, thank you so much. For the past 1 hour, you made the Ainivasi community in Peru just come alive for us. And it was a fascinating conversation. Thank you. I think we've learned a lot today about how programs can truly reflect the voice of the community. How do you build a participatory program where you balance respectful listening with new ideas, flexibility, and keep adapting? And we've also learned a lot about what it takes to be a locally grounded program and how we work with adolescents. So this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you for sharing the inspiring work that Sacred Valley Health does.
Thank you so much.
And with that, well, we hope you enjoyed this webinar. It is your donations that funds grants to organizations like Sacred Valley Health and programs like this webinar. And your monthly contribution helps us keep it going. It makes a lasting impact for women and girls globally. If you're already a monthly donor to Rise, we thank you. And if you're not, you can always start a recurring gift or increase your your current monthly gifts by going to togetherwomenrise.org and using the donate button at the top. I believe Kia is also adding that link to the chat. We also have a lot of other exciting programming lined up for you for the rest of May. We have a book club that features the Salvi Soul cookbook on May 6th, and we will be talking to the author, Carla Tatiana Vasquez, who will be our guest speaker. You do not need to read the book to attend this event. If you're anything like me, I never get around to reading the book before my book club meetings, but just come out and learn more about the vibrant culture of El Salvador and hear the powerful stories of the Salvadoran women that we will discuss at that virtual event. Our next monthly webinar is on June 5th, where we will spotlight the issues facing refugee women and girls and the programs that help them break out of the cycle of abuse and poverty. And you can learn about all of these and other upcoming events on the Together Women Rise website under the upcoming events page or under the Join Us tab. And with that, if you would like to stay behind today and join the virtual chapter discussion about Sacred Valley Health, please just stay on Zoom. You don't need to change anything. And Vicky Bush Joseph, the Vice Chair of Rise's Board of Directors, will be hosting the chat right here. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, everyone who came out to join us this evening. And Vicky, I turn the floor over to you.